The lantern was now full of flames, and lamps and glasses were bursting and flying in all directions. My clothing was on fire, and to move from the place where I was would be instant death from the Indians' rifles. The year was 1836. The Seminole War had erupted across the Florida frontier a year earlier. Small farms, forts, and settlements were attacked and raided by the Seminoles. Quick attacks that aimed to massacre as many people as possible. The Cape Florida Lighthouse was at the edge of the frontier, isolated from the peninsula, a safe beacon for ships off the coast. What happened at Cape Florida would become one of the most horrifying survival stories from the Seminole Wars. The Second Seminole War was the longest and costliest war in Florida's history. It lasted for 7 years and took the lives of over 4,500 people. The war began after the Seminoles massacred 110 soldiers in the pine woods of modern-day Sumter County. Major Francis L. Dade was leading a wagon train to Fort King when the Seminoles attacked. 3 men survived the battle, but only 2 made it back alive. After President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act in 1830, all Native Americans east of the Mississippi were set to be moved to Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma. Some of the Seminoles agreed to move west. The others withdrew into Florida's vast swamps, hammocks, and forests. They prepared to fight. The first Cape Florida Lighthouse was built in 1825 to guide ships around the Florida Reef. The area around Biscayne was a dangerous place for vessels. Numerous historic shipwrecks lay off the coast, including the British warship HMS Fowey, which sank in 1748. The lighthouse was 65 feet tall and built from solid brick 5 feet thick at the base. Wooden stairs were at the center, spiraling up to the light. The Cape Florida Lighthouse was almost completely isolated, besides a few settlements in the surrounding area. Maps from the era show almost nothing for miles. The lighthouse was lit on December 17, 1825. The first keeper was John DuBois, who served for 10 years. John DuBois moved his family to Key West in January 1836. After the brutal New River Massacre. The New River settlement was established in the 1780s. William Cooley and his family were attacked by a band of Seminole warriors on January 4, 1836. Around 20 warriors raided the plantation. Cooley's wife and children were killed in the attack. Some of the survivors made it to the Cape Florida Lighthouse after warning settlers along their way. After the massacre, the lighthouse was fortified by U.S. Navy Lieutenant George Bosch. His work party boarded up the ground floor windows, filled them with stone, and reinforced the door. John DuBois went to visit his family in Key West on July 18, 1836. 2 men would be left behind to tend the light and keep up with duties. Assistant Keeper John W.B. Thompson and slave Aaron Carter. The lighthouse was stocked with gunpowder, muskets, and ammunition. With recent Seminole attacks in the area, the 2 men had to stay vigilant. The afternoon of July 23, 1836 was a typical hot and humid summer day. John Thompson noticed a group of Seminoles approaching the lighthouse just before complete chaos erupted. These are the events that transpired, written by John Thompson.
On the 23rd of July last, about 4 p.m., as I was going from the kitchen to the dwelling place of Cape Florida Lighthouse, I discovered a large body of Indians within 20 yards of me. back of the kitchen. I ran for the lighthouse and called out to the old Negro man that was with me to run, for the Indians were near. At that moment, they discharged a volley of rifle balls, which cut my coat and hat and perforated the door in many places. When we got inside, as I was turning the key in the door, the savages had hold of the door. I stationed the old Negro at the door with orders to let me know if they attempted to break in. I then took my 3 muskets, which were loaded with ball and buckshot, and went to the second window. Seeing a large body of Indians near the dwelling house, I discharged my muskets in succession among them, which put them in some confusion. They then for the second time began their horrid yells, and in a minute no glass or sash was left in the window, for they vented their rage at that spot. I fired at them from some of the other windows and from the top of the lighthouse. In fact, I fired wherever I could get an Indian for a mark. I kept them from the lighthouse until dark. Then they poured in a heavy fire at all the windows and into the big lantern at the top of the lighthouse. That was the time they set fire to the door and window, which were even with the ground. The window was boarded up with plank and filled up with stone inside, but the flames spread fast, being fed with yellow pine wood. Their musket balls had perforated the tin tanks of oil, consisting of 225 gallons. My bedding, clothing, and in fact everything I had was soaked in oil. I stopped at the door until driven away by the flames. I then took a keg of gunpowder, my musket balls, and 1 musket to the top of the lighthouse, then went below and began to cut away the stairs about halfway up from the bottom. I had difficulty getting this old Negro up the space I had already cut, but the flames now drove me from my labor, and I retreated to the top of the lighthouse. I covered over the scuttle which led to the lantern, which kept the fire from me for some time. But at last the awful moment arrived when there was the crackling of flames burning around me. The savages at the same time began their hellish yells. My poor old Negro looked over at me with tears in his eyes, but could not speak. We went out to the lantern and lay down on the edge of the platform, 2 feet wide. The lantern now was full of flames, and lamps and glasses were bursting and flying in all directions. My clothing was on fire, and to move from the place where I was would be instant death from the Indians' rifles. My flesh was roasting, and to put an end to my horrible sufferings, I got up, threw the keg of gunpowder down the scuttle. Instantly, it exploded and shook the tower from the top to the bottom. It had not the desired effect, however, of blowing me into eternity, but it threw down the stairs and all the wooden work near the top of the house. It damped the fire for a moment, but it soon blazed up as fierce as ever, and in 2 minutes the fire fell to the bottom of the lighthouse. I found the old Negro man dead, being shot in several places and literally roasted. A few minutes after the fire fell, a stiff breeze sprung up from the southward, which was a great blessing to me. I had to lie where I was, for I could not walk, having received 6 rifle balls, 3 in each foot. The Indians, thinking me dead, left the lighthouse and set fire to the dwelling house, kitchen, and other outhouses, and began to carry their plunder to the beach. They took all the empty barrels, the drawers of the bureaus, and in fact, everything that would act as a vessel to hold anything. My provisions were in the lighthouse, except for a barrel of flour which they took off. After loading my little sloop, about 10 or 12 went in that, and the rest took to the beach to meet at the other end of the island. That happened, as I judge, about 10 a.m. My eyes being much affected prevented me from knowing their exact force, but I judge there were from 30 to 40, perhaps more. With them gone, I was now as bad off as before. I had a burning fever on me, my feet were shot to pieces, and I had no clothes to cover me, nothing to eat or drink, a hot sun overhead, a dead man at my side, no friend near or any to expect, and placed between 70 and 80 feet from the earth, with no chance of getting down. My situation was truly horrible. About noon, I thought I could perceive a vessel not far off. Sometime in the afternoon, I saw 2 boats with my sloop in tow coming to the landing. I had no doubt, but they were Indians, and having seen my signals, had returned to finish their murderous designs. But they proved to be boats from the United States schooner Motto, in charge of Captain Armstrong, and a detachment of seamen and marines under the command of Lieutenant Lloyd of the sloop of war, Concord. The rescuers informed me they had heard my explosion 12 miles off and had run down to my assistance, but didn't expect to find me alive. Those gentlemen did all in their power to relieve me, but night was coming on, so they returned to the Motto. Next morning, 3 boats landed. They had made a kite during the night to get a line to me, but without effect. They then fired twine from their muskets, made fast to a ramrod, which I received. I could then haul up a tail block and made fast around an iron stanchion, put the twine through the block, and they below, by that means, sent a 2-inch rope and hoisted up 2 men who soon landed me on terra firma. I must state here that the Italian had made a ladder by lashing pieces of wood across the lightning rod, near 40 feet from the ground, as if to save my scalp. After I got on the Motto, every man from the captain to the cook tried to alleviate my sufferings. 3 days later, I was received in the military hospital through the politeness of Lieutenant Alvord of the 4th Regiment of United States Infantry. These lines are written to let my friends know that I am still in the land of the living and am now in Charleston, South Carolina, where every attention is paid to me. Although a cripple, I can eat my allowance and walk without the use of a cane. Yours very respectfully, John W.B. Thompson.
After the attack, the lighthouse sat vacant for 10 years. The Second Seminole War raged for 6 more years until 1842. The Armed Occupation Act of 1842 brought thousands of settlers to the interior of Florida, pushing the Seminoles into the Florida Everglades. The lighthouse was commissioned to be rebuilt in 1846 for $7,995. It was rebuilt with the same bricks from the original tower and house. The light was lit again in April 1847. The Cape Florida Lighthouse survived the Civil War, numerous hurricanes, including the powerful 1926 Miami hurricane, with the eye passing right over the lighthouse. It has stood the test of time. Although it was renovated numerous times, the lighthouse still stands with the same brick that witnessed the Cape Florida Lighthouse attack of 1836. I want to thank y'all for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you on the next. Peace.